Have you ever opened a letter from your homeowners association and just felt your stomach drop? Your fees are going up, and not by a little. Well, for one homeowner, that exact scenario kicked off a legal battle that honestly reveals a really surprising truth about just how much power HOAs can have. So just imagine it. You get that letter. Your mandatory HOA fees are jumping 10%. Right now, I think for most of us, our first thought is, wait a second, can they even do that? Is that legal? Well, one homeowner in Arizona decided he was going to challenge it. And his story is, well, it's a pretty fascinating lesson for anyone who lives in a community with an HOA. All right, let's get into it. This whole story starts with a pretty classic showdown. It's one single homeowner versus the entire board of his association. So, the year is 2020. Our homeowner, Thomas W. Sweeney, decides he's had enough, and he officially takes on his HOA, the Warner Ranch Landing Association. He goes and files a formal dispute, which sets the whole stage for a real legal hearing.
And his claim was a really big one. He wasn't just, a little annoyed by the increase. He was alleging that the 10% hike in his annual fees was a direct violation of the community's own rules. He believed it was completely illegal.
So, what was Mr. Sweeney's case really built on? Let's break down his side of the argument and get into how he was reading the rules. Okay, so the core of his argument came down to how he read the community's governing documents, the CC&Rs. He believed the rules allowed for a fee increase that was tied to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. He argued that the other option, a flat 5% increase, was really just a backup plan in case the CPI wasn't around anymore. And since the CPI was, still being published, he felt that a 10% hike was just way out of bounds. And let's actually look at the numbers here. The fee was about to jump from just under $1,900 to almost $2,100. Now, that might not sound like a life-changing amount of money, but it was this real financial hit that kicked off the entire dispute. And there was another layer to this. Mr. Sweeney actually testified that he didn't think this was just about the budget. He believed that this big 10% increase was basically payback, a form of retaliation after the homeowners of the community had just voted down a totally separate special assessment that the board really wanted to pass. Okay, so now let's flip over to the other side of the courtroom and see how the HOA defended what they did, because their argument pretty much reframed this entire situation. So the association's defense, they completely flipped the script. They came back and said, hey, not only was the 10% increase perfectly legal, but for years, we've actually been giving all you residents a huge discount by not charging you the maximum amount we were legally allowed to. Now, this timeline is really key to understanding their logic. The original maximum fee was set way back in 1987. Then, for 6 straight years, from 2011 to 2017, fees didn't go up at all. Then there was just one 5% increase in 2018. The HOA's argument was that every single year they didn't raise the fees, the potential maximum they were allowed to charge kept growing. It was all cumulative, just building up in the background, totally unused. And here is the part of their argument that is absolutely jaw-dropping. The fee they were actually charging was around $2,100. But because all those potential past increases added up, they calculated that the absolute maximum they could have legally charged that year was over $4,200. All of a sudden, that 10% hike didn't just look legal, it looked, well, downright generous. So how in the world could two different parties read the exact same document and come away with such wildly different conclusions? Well, it all comes down to the super dense legal language of the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The CC&Rs. So here it is, the exact text from Article 8.1.5. I know, it's a total mouthful of legalese. But the key part says the maximum assessment can be increased by a rate equal to the greater of the CPI increase for that year, or 5%. And that's it. That's the whole ballgame. The entire case hinged on those two little words, greater of. Mr. Sweeney read the or to mean that the 5% was just a backup plan. The HOA, on the other hand, interpreted greater of to mean they could pick whichever of the two options was higher each year, which let that potential cap just grow and grow and grow. So with these two completely opposite interpretations on the table, an administrative law judge had to make a call. Let's see how the final verdict came down. The decision was, well, it was decisive. The judge dismissed Mr. Sweeney's petition, siding completely with the Warner Ranch Landing Association. The HOA won. So why did they win? It all boiled down to this legal standard called preponderance of the evidence. In a case like this, the burden of proof was actually on Mr. Sweeney to show that his claim was more likely true than not. And the judge ruled that he just failed to do that. He only offered up his personal interpretation, while the HOA came with calculations and testimony showing their actions were totally consistent with the plain reading of the CC&Rs. So, what can we all learn from this case if we live in an HOA? First, and this is the big one, you have got to read the fine print. Second, you have to understand that fee caps can be cumulative, which means your HOA might have way more power to raise fees than you think. And finally, if you decide to challenge them, remember, the burden of proof is on you to bring hard evidence, not just how you feel about it. And you know, this whole thing brings us to one final thought. This entire expensive, stressful legal battle was caused by two words, greater of, just hidden in some dense document. It really makes you stop and wonder, doesn't it? What other surprising and maybe powerful rules might be hiding in plain sight in your own HOA documents?